Some people ask me if I ever run out of things to cover in the Linux, open source, privacy or open web space, and well, no, because here is another jam-packed edition of the Linux and open source news show. And so this week we have Mozilla getting a brand new CEO just after launching a very overpriced service. We have Apple continuing their malicious compliance and disabling support for PWAs in the EU. We also have Wine coming to Android, but in closed source format. And we also have XFCE decided to keep support for X11. And we have the Elementary OS 8 ISO in early access. And we have this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Proton Mail. You probably already know them. They are a private and secure email service with end-to-end and zero-access encryption. And on top of that, they give you access to a full suite of online tools, like a calendar, contact, storage space, VPN, and password manager, all encrypted, of course. And Proton Mail keeps evolving, as it now can help you better manage your time with its new snooze and schedule features. You can now snooze an email that you don't want to read right now, and it will reappear in your inbox when you need it or when you have time. And if you work in a global team or if you have news to share but not before a specific time and date, you can also now schedule emails to be sent at a specific time. So the recipient will get it at the most convenient moment and not before you're ready. Your Proton account is free, and if you need more advanced privacy and security features or more storage space, they have paid plans to help with that. So click the link in the description of the video and start reclaiming your privacy. So Mozilla has a new CEO. Following the State of Mozilla that was published a few weeks ago, it looks like Mitchell Baker has stepped down as CEO for Mozilla and will retain her position of executive chairwoman. In her place comes Laura Chambers, who worked for Airbnb, PayPal, eBay, and served on Mozilla's board for 3 years. And she's apparently mostly a product person, so not an engineer. I'm sure some people will find that problematic. I personally think that's fine. She outlined the main focus for the non-profit, and this is, of course, defining a clear strategy, something Mozilla has seemingly lacked for a while, or maybe they didn't communicate it well enough. And second, doubling down on their core products like Firefox, plus bringing new products to market, because Mozilla still needs to get under the thumb of Google's funding. And hopefully the latest overpriced Monitor Plus service that they launched recently was a last-ditch effort from the previous CEO, and not the first one of these new products from the new CEO. Monitor Plus, if you don't know, is a service that lets you maybe scrub your leaked data from a big selection of data brokers for $14 per month. This feels way too expensive for what it does, as first, there is no guarantee any data broker will actually remove the personal info they're selling after it leaked or was hacked, and second, there's also no guarantee that this data is also not available on even less reputable marketplaces that Mozilla doesn't monitor, or that it wasn't already bought and used by malicious actors. $14 for that feels like a lot. Now, Laura Chambers, the new CEO, also wants to have more engagement with the community and to focus on open source, which cannot hurt, as it sometimes feels Mozilla can be sort of a black box. They're launching and starting things at random with very few discussions and interactions with the community. Interestingly, there is no mention of AI, apart from saying that everyone battles to own the future of AI. No mention of the pivot towards AI Mozilla announced a few weeks ago. Now, one might think that the previous announcement that they were focusing on AI was very poorly received, and thus Mozilla decided a shakeup was in order and they got a new CEO. I think the priorities here are in order, focusing on the current products that really need to improve, like Firefox, and launching some new stuff which hopefully will be relevant and useful. I think that's the core goal that we all expect from Mozilla. We want a better, more competitive web browser, and we don't really want another weird tool that no one is ever gonna use. So, Microsoft decided to extend support for Ubuntu 18.04 for VS Code. I reported last week on the update Microsoft applied to their IDE that broke compatibility with the old LTS version, which left a bunch of users unable to access their infrastructure, and it looks like Microsoft agrees that it wasn't done in the best way or with the best timing, as they decided to give 18.04 another 12 months of support. They will publish what they call a recover update to restore that support, which will let people keep getting updates without breaking their workflow. Of course, Microsoft had previously announced they would drop 18.04, it was a while back. They mentioned that loss of compatibility in their release notes, but since VS Code, like a lot of Electron apps, tends to auto-update, anyone who had not disabled that was caught off guard, and a nice warning banner or pop-up would have helped with the issue, I guess. And as a lot of people pointed out to me, having auto-updates on for a crucial part of your workflow is probably a bad idea, especially on an app that is proprietary and that you don't exactly control. But it's also true for open source apps. If you absolutely depend on a program to work, you should at least get the time to read the release notes to make sure that it doesn't break what you rely upon. Now it looks like Kubuntu 24.04 and other variants of the next LTS that use KDE, like Ubuntu Studio, will not use Plasma 6. Their feature freeze is right at the same time as the planned Plasma 6 release, meaning they don't feel they will have enough time to test everything to the standard of an LTS. And so Ubuntu users will have to wait for Ubuntu 24.10 to get the latest Plasma release, which is a bit annoying. The Kubuntu Council was unanimous on the matter, and I guess it is the best decision for an LTS, since you would want to provide the most stable distro you can. Now, of course, there will always be the backports PPA that provides newer versions of packages and desktop environments for Ubuntu, and it will probably let users upgrade to Plasma 6 on 24.04. But generally, these packages only appear once the next release of Ubuntu that has them is out, so you will still have to wait for 24.10 anyway. It is a bit disappointing that people switching to Ubuntu 24.04 will not get to use Plasma 6 for another 6 months, because it comes with a lot of improvements and much better Wayland support and a bunch of cool new features, but I guess it was the smart decision for an LTS if they didn't want to push it back a month or two. Now it looks like Apple's malicious compliance with the EU regulations continues, as the betas for iOS 17 keep arriving, and some things are just not working as intended. They're actually intended to not work. This time it's progressive web apps, which seem to just not function anymore. You can still create a shortcut on your home screen for any website or web app, but it will not open as a full-screen app. It will open as a browser page with all the usual Safari UI that you generally do not want in a progressive web app. It's also been reported that these web apps will thus lose the stored local data, since they're handled as a Safari tab that might be purged at some point, and notifications will also not work, making these PWAs perfectly useless. And to confirm that these changes are intentional and not just a beta-related problem, some people have seen a specific system iOS pop-up appear, stating that these PWAs will open in Safari from now on, hinting at the fact that Apple just doesn't want you to use any of those. It seems limited to the EU for some reason. Users from other countries do not seem affected. And this is probably all linked to the fact that Apple has to open iOS to third-party browser engines. When they control the only browser engine on iOS, they could voluntarily hamstring PWAs to make them less interesting than native apps you could download from their App Store. But when they lose control over the rendering engine, then there's no saying if Firefox or Chrome, when they have their own rendering engine on iOS, will not support all the features for PWAs, and if developers will just not decide to go this route instead of paying the hefty fees that Apple wants to distribute an app on iOS. So the only way they found is to just completely remove PWA support in the EU altogether from the system. You just do not have a choice right now, which really sucks. Apple, fix your shit, seriously. And apparently, XFCE, alongside Cinnamon, might be the desktop for people who don't want to move to Wayland too soon, as XFCE announced that with version 4.20, haha, funny number. So while XFCE 4.20 will bring Wayland support, they will also keep supporting X11, and they have no plans to ditch it in the near future. They were uncertain on whether they should maintain that compatibility, but they elected to keep it in the end. The Wayland session will be a first draft in the new version with the minimal set of features needed to run a desktop, and they will build on top of that with each update. They will rely on WL roots, a base implementation of most of Wayland's protocols that is already used by a bunch of tiling window managers, and the XFCE developers have updated their roadmap for Wayland support as well. And what's interesting is that they're also using something called libxfce for windowing, and that's a library that abstracts a bunch of operations and concepts, so they can work with Wayland and X11 without having to maintain two different code bases for each component of the desktop. You just add stuff to that library itself, and whether you run on X11 or Wayland, stuff reacts as you would expect. This is a cool approach, and it looks like at least one other desktop, namely Budgie, is also interested in using it for their own Wayland implementation. So there is no planned release date for 4.20 just yet. It will release when it's ready, but for XFCE users, you're used to not getting major updates every weekend, so that's probably fine. And if you didn't like XFCE before, adding Wayland support will probably not change how you feel about the experience of using that one. Now, Elementary OS 8 is now available in early access, meaning that if you support the project on Patreon or GitHub, you can already get an ISO and test things out. It is all super experimental, so do not run that on a production PC, but there are a bunch of nice changes in there. Updates have moved to the settings instead of the App Center and can be downloaded automatically, on top of letting you know if there are security updates in there so you can apply them quickly. Search in the settings is now much better and ranks settings pages in a more logical way. Other settings pages received some love as well, and the app got a new icon. The multitasking view replaced its dull grey background with a blurred version of the wallpaper, which looks much nicer, and the workspace switcher now uses rounded corners and supports light and dark mode. And on top of that, when you click an app's icon when this app has multiple windows open, instead of minimizing everything, you will open a window spread, so you can select the window you actually wanted to bring to focus. So it's looking good for Elementary OS 8. It will probably release a bunch of months after Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, which it will use as its base, and it will not redefine the whole desktop experience. But it looks polished and thought out, and I'll make sure to give it a shot when it has a stable release. And now let's talk about Linux gaming, and we have some interesting things happening. Specifically, a new project to bring Windows games to Android, of all things. The goal would be to bring Wine, DXVK, and VKD3D to Android, to have the complete translation layer, and then to combine that with FEX to emulate an x86 platform on ARM devices. The solution, called Cassia, was presented by Igalia at FOSDEM 2024, which happened last weekend in Brussels. It's obviously still a work in progress, and it probably will not give you the absolute best performance since there's an architecture emulation layer in there. And apparently, and very surprisingly, this thing will be distributed as a closed source Android app. They will upstream any modification they make to the open source projects that they use to conform with the licenses, but the complete package will not be open source, which feels really weird. They did commit to open sourcing everything if they decided to stop working on the project, but that's just not great. It is a very interesting project with a bunch of challenges to overcome, namely, how are games going to perform? You're probably never going to play super recent AAA titles on an Android phone, but you might be able to play a bunch of stuff. But seeing that as closed source, especially for something announced at FOSDEM, which is for free and open source software, feels kinda weird. And Manjaro unveiled the Orange Pi Neon at FOSDEM as well. It's a handheld gaming console powered by, you guessed it, Manjaro. It uses a Ryzen 7 7840U, so pretty powerful, 8 cores, 16 threads. It's paired with a 1920 by 1200 screen at 7 inches and a 120Hz refresh rate. It has apparently a very solid cooling system, it has Hall effect triggers for more precise inputs, and either 16 or 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM, and up to 2 TB of PCIe 4 SSD storage. The battery is 50 Wh and you will get 2 USB 4 Type-C ports and a headphone jack. We don't know yet how much it will cost or when it will be available, but it looks like an interesting device, especially since it will run a Linux distro out of the box, meaning you will very likely be able to install anything else you would like in there instead of Manjaro, like Holo ISO, Bazzite, Nobara, or any other gaming-focused distro. Personally, I would not run Manjaro on this thing because why? If you just want a gaming handheld, you have much better options out there, and if you run a desktop, there are much better options than Manjaro as well, and I personally also do not need a new handheld. But if the Steam Deck feels a little bit too underpowered for you, this one might be just a bit better. Depending on the price, it could be a cool solution. And if you're looking at more powerful hardware to game on Linux or just to use Linux, why not check out today's sponsor, Tuxedo. They make laptops, desktops, and NUCs that ship with Linux out of the box. They picked all the hardware in all these computers because it specifically is well supported by Linux. You have plenty of choice for any ultrabook, gaming laptop, NUC, tower, workstation, gaming PC, anything that you might want. You can customize a bunch of the components inside. You can change the RAM, the SSD, you can change the CPU, the GPU in a lot of devices. You can open all the laptops, repair them and upgrade them, and you can even have your own custom keyboard layout on your laptop or your own logo engraved on the lid. I only use Tuxedo computers these days. I edit all these videos on a Tuxedo laptop, the Infinity Book Pro 16, and I run all my gaming stuff on a Tuxedo Cube, which runs Holo ISO for a good gaming experience. So if you need a new computer and you want to run Linux on it, and you want to support a company that actually supports Linux, click the link in the description of the video and get yourself a new Tuxedo PC. They're really, really good. So, thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, and to write a comment as well. And if you really enjoyed it, you can become a Patreon member or a YouTube member, and you'll get access to a daily Linux and open source news show. So check that out in the description of the video. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!